I'm Jo Fraser. I'm the Convenor of ARMS Victoria, and I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of ARMS and VANISH to the 13th anniversary of the Victorian apology and the 7th anniversary of the unveiling of Taken Not Given. Now, VANISH is recording the speeches today in full and uploading them onto their YouTube account. And they'll also be taking photos and short video footage to share in VANISH and ARMS communications and on social media. So if you would prefer not to be photographed or videoed, please let Hannah know, and she will put a yellow label on you so that you don't get photographed. Okay, we acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first peoples and traditional owners and custodians of the land and waterways on which we live. We honour and pay our respects to elders past and present. We recognise all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their ongoing strength and resilience despite the past and present impacts of colonisation and dispossession. And we also acknowledge the many Aboriginal women who had their children taken from them. So I'd like to welcome everyone today here to a slightly different Victorian Apology and Taken Not Given anniversary event. This is what happens when a creative from the arts world is asked to be guest speaker. And a particular welcome to Lisa Stockholm from RAV, to Helen Campbell, Sally Finlay and Erica Owens from the Redress Scheme, Michelle Blanchard, CEO of VANISH, Todd Duggan, Chair of VANISH Committee, Christopher Wade, Manager of Uniting Heritage Services, and Katrina, who was his predecessor. And their apologies from Naomi Mushin, Ted Baillieu, Lynette Hewitson, Shelley Corrin, Sue Penneque, and Ange Karavidas in the AIS leadership team. So, welcome to Taken Not Given. We hope this is a space where all people can come and reflect in peace, hope and tranquility. This is a memorial for all those affected by adoption and loss, not only the young mother represented on the plinth, her baby and her toddler and growing child, but also the adult that they became. It's also a space for all those for whom the ripple effect of adoption has touched lives. As Taken Not Given is a memorial for all of us, so the Victorian apology was inclusive of mothers, fathers and adoptees. It's very special that we come together today on a day like this to acknowledge our loss, grief, trauma and pain. And I'd like to introduce Mari Meggitt, who was the founder of ARMS, to speak to you.
On this apology, not just this one but the national one over the last little while, partly because we have such, I think, mixed emotions about it. Some people say, so what? I kind of have a shock when I hear that. And other people go, oh gosh, that really mattered. And it led me to doing some thinking about, well, what exactly, oh my gracious me. Why make an apology? You know, why do we make apologies, both at a personal level and, at a public level like this? And obviously, at least in part, it's about, large part, I think, taking responsibility for causing harm. I think that's really significant. It's about, at some level, showing respect for the people who are saying loudly, something terrible happened, and we believe that it was because of you. I think that respect is really, valuable to many of us. It is an attempt, I think, to make some effort to repair the civic relationship between, Victorians and our government. And it does demonstrate accountability as well as empathy with what has been what's occurred in the past and continues to resonate for all of us. I do believe that it can restore some sense of trust, certainly some dignity to us, and it can provide a sense of justice to us. And probably more than anything, I think that it recognises a clear understanding on the part of others, particularly a government, about what has been done in their name and in the name of the Victorian people to us, to all of us. And in thinking that through, I thought, well, then how do we understand its value to us? And obviously, perhaps it provides some emotional healing. You know, at least it does acknowledge our hurt for all of us. And that does enable us to feel as though we were heard. At least we were heard. It's also an acknowledgement of the pain and the suffering that has been caused. It might, of course, reduce negative feelings that we might have towards, well, perhaps a particular individual, but probably more importantly, an institution. Although I have to say some institutions have been slow with their apologies. And I think as well, there are many people, certainly many women, who feel quite threatened by institutions and governments, and I do think that it helps to, potentially, to reduce some of that feeling of threat when we engage with institutions. And that led me to say, well, what is it for us? And I mean us, you know, our offspring, ourselves, our organisation ARMS. As I said earlier, I think for many people, unfortunately, the apology counts for little because the crime that against us was so great. It wasn't just the loss of a child, it was also this really deep assault on our bodies, and on our psychological well-being, and of course on our futures. It caused, you know, a fracture that could not be healed by subsequent children, nor by having no children. And it was a fracture that impacted every relationship that we had at the time and that we would have. I guess I could say it was a transgression that against us that would last a lifetime, that would bring with it grief, the shame, the loss, the despair, and the broken relationships that I think all of us have experienced at some point or other in our lives. Can I turn the page? And I think in the end it was a transgression that fundamentally changed, certainly for us, who we were and who we might have become as adults had this not occurred. I do think in so many ways that is also true for our offspring. For our child that was taken, the cost, of course, was quite different, but it was equally great. They lost their origin story, the history of who they were, and their rightful place in our lives. They lost the opportunity to be raised by their family of origin and to grow up recognising themselves in the people around them. It meant that they grew up different. For so many, they were raised surrounded by a secret with parents who did not know how to reveal the truth and to be honest. It was a betrayal, I think, that left many feeling that they had been robbed of an authentic family. It meant that that cornerstone of their lives, the family, felt uncertain, perhaps unstable, certainly left with a sense of many feeling unanchored. Our children also carried, I believe, a devastating wound, that of being born into the absence of that one anchoring, familiar being who they were so deeply and fundamentally connected to, their mother, me, us. It must have been terrifying for many of you, for all of them. And it formed you, those of you here who have been adopted. Perhaps in this context, it's so much easier to understand why so many of us feel ambivalent about an apology. For all of us who have felt that way, I would like to take us back to what an apology is not. Clearly, it cannot retract any of these events. It cannot change the years of hurt or the fear that came with not knowing whether our child was alive, whether they fared well. It can't change how we lived and what the consequences were of our loss. It can't necessarily heal the civic relationship that was demolished by the actions of the governments of the time and its handmaidens, the social workers, the doctors, the nurses, the priests, and sadly for many of us, our parents. A system that was implemented by people. If we can accept those constraints, perhaps we can find some comfort in the apology, that we can take something from it of value. It did give us an acknowledgement of the crime against us and against our child. It acknowledged the hurt and the wrongness of the actions of the state. It acknowledged that the system it had put in place to rob us of our child it was wrong. It took responsibility for the wrong that it had done us. And perhaps most importantly, it acknowledged that it was not simply a case of us giving away our child. It accepted that the system had been built that way to ensure that our child would be taken, regardless of the fact that we were the mother of our child. In that, the state agreed that their actions were both illegal and immoral. It is well known that it's not enough to say that we're sorry. We also need to be sorry. As individuals, we as individuals have many ways in which we can say sorry and do things that demonstrate that sorrow, that the truth of that experience, because as we know, actions speak louder than words. In Victoria, to the government's credit, they have acted to demonstrate that their words had meaning. They provided this wonderful memorial with music at the time and flowers and an afternoon tea, and their handmaidens at the time demonstrated in all of their interactions with us on that day and in the lead up to it their absolute respect, their concern for us, and their acknowledgement of what had happened. The government went further and put in place a redress, a financial acknowledgement, as well as immediate additional payments for those mothers who were in significant need at the time. They are continuing to provide individual counselling or whatever service a mother feels will actually assuage some of the ongoing impact that this state-imposed brutalising created. By each of those actions, they are demonstrating their genuine feelings of remorse and regret. Our children, who of course are no longer children, have also been given this apology. And for many, that is also not enough. And we will continue to support you as you seek the actions that will speak louder than the words of this apology. As an organisation, ARMS accepts the apology from the government and believes that it is heartfelt. We appreciate the actions that the government has taken to demonstrate that it was and is a meaningful apology. And this many years later, they continue to work to demonstrate that. That's not to say that at a personal, individual level, our pain is assuaged or that all is well somehow. Far from it. We recognise that the apology cannot provide that to any of us. Governments know that. We know that. We accept and acknowledge, on behalf of the people, the government is doing what it can to acknowledge the hostile role that governments in the past have played in our lives. That seems about the most it can do. For us, it is our journey now to take what balm we can from these words and actions, to work through the pain, to find whatever soothing respite we might be able to find, and to lean into the justice that we have been given by having been proclaimed by government that indeed our child was taken, not given. It is our hope that you, our offspring, will feel some recognition from the apology of your loss and of the lifelong impact of that decision to take you from us. It does not change your life's journey, but we wish for you that in knowing that the state set up a system to intentionally take you from us, that you can feel some healing in the rift between us and you. It is our day. We are acknowledged.
Hello everybody, can you hear me? Yes. It's very loud here, so I'm going to speak quite loudly as well. We've cottoned onto a theme here today with our speeches because, first of all, I would like to thank you, Joe, for that lovely introduction, and I'd like to thank ARMS and the committee for hosting this event again today, and to the VANISH staff who've been setting up, and to Michelle Blanchard, the CEO of VANISH, but most of all to you, because as a theatre maker, this is a public theatre, and without you showing up as an audience, it can't happen. So thank you very much. So, as a theatre artist, we're gathering here to remember a turning point in Australian history through an act of parliamentary theatre, that is, through powerful words performed, recorded, transcribed, archived into historical record, countering the social belief in adoption as a social good. So, can I just ask for a show of hands, please, anybody who's here who is either not adopted or not a mother? Great. Did you see the apology? Anyone? No. Okay. So when I was asked to speak here today, I decided to take a look at the apology because I have read it. It's in my computer. And I'd like to read it to you now. And so please, I'm not intending to distress anybody. I'd just like to deliver the words of the Liberal State Premier, the Honourable Ted Baillieu, and in certificate form was also signed by Dan Andrews as the leader of the opposition at the time, as well as the Deputy Premier and the Greens leader. So, this Parliament expresses our formal and sincere apology to the mothers, fathers, sons and daughters who were profoundly harmed by past adoption practices. We acknowledge many thousands of Victorian babies were taken from their mothers without informed consent, and that this caused immeasurable grief. We express our sincere regret and sorrow, we express our sincere sorrow and regret for the health and welfare policies that condoned the practice of forced separation. These were misguided, unwarranted, and caused immeasurable pain. To the mothers and fathers who were deprived of the opportunity to love and care for your children and for the pain and trauma you experienced, we are deeply sorry. And to the sons and daughters for whom adoption meant continual anxiety, uncertainty, and the deprivation of a natural family connection, we offer our sincere apology. Today, with all members of the Parliament of Victoria gathered, we acknowledge the devastating and ongoing impacts of these practices of the past. And they apologised again for all who were harmed, and they also undertook to never forget and to never repeat such practices. So I'd like to now consider a few of the words of this apology, and to firstly state that these practices of the past live on in the present. When people say to us, "Oh, get over it, haven't you got over it yet?" No, we are the walking embodiment of that historical past. So, the words of the Victorian apology struck me as more direct than those of the national apology. The acknowledgement of mothers, fathers, sons and daughters having been profoundly harmed, and then the word condoned, having regret for the past health and welfare policies that condoned the practice of forced separation. So I went to the thesaurus to look up the word condoned, because I didn't quite understand what they were saying. To condone means to deliberately ignore, to not take into consideration, to disregard, to take no notice of, to take no notice of, to accept, to allow, to make allowances for, to let pass, to turn a blind eye, to overlook, to forget, to blink at, to wink at, and to connive. And so I had to examine the word connive, which means to conspire, to collude, to be in collusion, to plot, to scheme, to participate in a conspiracy. So let's just absorb that for a moment. To participate in a conspiracy, to conspire to take and permanently separate babies from their mothers, meaning that the Victorian government acknowledged there's overwhelming evidence that the actions of others, as Lily pointed out, the actions of others behind closed doors facilitated thousands upon thousands of adoptions, of infant adoptions. And I'm sure there were workers in the industry who knew that taking babies from their mothers is an act of unethical cruelty. But they were under the instruction of their employers. They were able to turn a blind eye to the horrific practice called the clean break, a theory put into action, despite the research of the early 1940s that to do so caused both baby and mother profound harm. The theory that separation as soon as possible after birth, by law and by practice, was performed in the best interests of the child and their mother, but we know that this inflicted profound harm upon both. So then I went to the Victorian Government website in search of a reference to the clean break theory. But instead I found further explanation that past adoption practices in fact refers to any practices related to forced adoption, stolen generations, closed adoption, or children placed with people who were not suitable. Not suitable? The Vic Government website also states forced adoption refers to past practices that forcibly separated mothers and their babies, and that the term is not used to describe experiences of individuals, but it is used to introduce the overarching subject matter. And I do think that it's true that the term forced adoption confuses people who don't know the history and who are outside our community. It confuses people because it sounds like people were being forced to adopt babies and children. And then I turned to the 2019 to 2021 inquiry and the responses to the report on historical forced adoption in Victoria, which, as we know, has resulted in the first ever redress scheme for mothers of loss to forced adoption practices in the world. In the world. And we must commend the Andrews Labor government for being the first government in the world to do that. The Tasmanian government, you may know, has followed suit this week. I'll come to that in a second. Anyway, so the responses to the report on historical forced adoption in Victoria was announced in 2022, and in a speech by committee chair Natalie Suleiman, to what appeared to me on the video to be a completely empty chamber. Unlike the state apology when everybody was present, she was delivering her recommendations to an empty room. I'd like to think that more people came in after she'd started, but who knows. Anyway, she said, throughout the inquiry, the committee heard time and time again how these harms have continued and how long-term meaningful action is long overdue. She said all organisations need to take responsibility to achieve this, and you may know that the Australian Association of Social Workers recently attempted to take responsibility in yet another apology, but that's another story. The committee recommended removal of the statute of limitations and establishing a redress scheme for mothers, as well as consideration of a similar scheme for people who were adopted. Ms Suleiman said the recommendations will enhance capacity to address the trauma of historical forced adoptions with specialised mental health support services and various measures to improve access to adoption records and make it easier for people to search for and reconnect with family. Please note, and this is what I'm doing now, she did not use qualifying terms to define blood kin as biological or our birth family, but as family. The committee also recommended a standalone inquiry to explore the impacts of adoption on adopted people. So, I applaud and I hope that the Tasmanian Government's redress scheme for mothers will put pressure on other states to follow suit. But what about adoptees? After the Tasmanian announcement, a representative of Adoptee Rights Australia wrote on their Facebook page, "What about adoptees? The adopted were stolen and trafficked to strangers. We were severed from our identity, ancestry and kin. We are still bound by discriminatory and draconian legislation which violates our human rights. We are still invisible and ignored." So, over the last 13 years, I've been working towards finding ways for us to be seen and heard. And Jo mentioned that what I do is I make theatre. And so when people come into an auditorium and they hear a play that about something that they don't know anything about and have not heard of before, they will go out of that auditorium changed. They can never say again that they don't know. So, I've been examining the historical facts and the language of the adoption story, analysing words and what they do, how they perform in the world. I've been exploring the truth of our lived experience and working towards finding ways to make us visible and for our stories to be heard and understood by others. But the language of the adoption story, what I call the script, is a limited set of words and phrases that have other people believing in the story that tells of unfit single mothers abandoning their babies, both perceived as doing the right thing and simultaneously casting mothers in the role of an irresponsible abandoner who loved her baby so much that she gave it away so that it could have a better life than what she could provide. It tells the story of being rescued by benevolent strangers, of being lucky to have been adopted, and most importantly, of being grateful. Adoption demands that we remain silent and invisible, and that we do not make waves, or if we do, we risk abandonment by the family into which we were adopted, or as many now assert, trafficked. So this year, under the auspices of ARMS and VANISH, I've been using my research discoveries to help others and to give a public voice to adult adoptees. And so now I would like to invite the members of the ARMS and VANISH performing ensembles to join me up here, please. I want you to be seen. These lovely people are some of the members of the ARMS and VANISH, survivors of past adoption practices. Survivors, we're calling it Survivors of Past Adoption Practices, a theatre for social justice and creative oral history project. So we began working together in February this year with funding from Relationships Australia Victoria and the Forced Adoption Support Services Small Grants program. Firstly, I designed and delivered an online pilot education program of 6 storytelling workshops for adult adoptees. working towards breaking the silence, writing and speaking in a different vocabulary, setting their own terms of reference, taking small steps towards changing social perceptions through truth-telling. In July, we advertised and held an information session for adult adoptees to begin conducting in-depth interviews, which will form the basis of an original theatre piece. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of 7 of the VANISH adoptee performing ensemble. Will you please take a bow, ladies? And since February this year, I have been in consultation with ARMS, the ARMS Committee, and similarly been conducting interviews since August with mothers who are ready to record their stories for preservation in historical record. From these interviews, we are also creating and will produce an original play with the mothers. For both, the objective of doing oral history interviews and long, in-depth interviews is to use that material to create the scripts, but also to use the interview intact, transcribed, and we hope, made publicly accessible in our national and state libraries. In December, all of us will be presenting a rehearsed reading of the 2 new scripts in the Studio Theatre at Gasworks Arts Park. It's work in progress. It's a small theatre space. We're trying to garner interest in funding this work to produce both plays in 2026 as audio dramas. And as Jo mentioned, like my PhD performance project, Infan's Voiced, a history play in 5 acts, you can hear a snippet. It's what we do. You can hear a snippet of the play on VANISH's website if you'd like to go and have a listen to it. So, to conclude, we'll be advertising for interviewees to participate in both oral history projects. So look out for this in ARMS and VANISH newsletters in 2026. And funding willing, the 2 new plays will be recorded and edited into audio dramas for hearings, as I'm calling them, in appropriate theatre spaces in 2027. So again, thank you very much, all of you, for being here. Thank you for showing up. Let's keep speaking the truth. Let's keep educating others and working towards an inquiry and redress for adoptees. Thank you.